International relations expert Dr. Bola Adediro joins me now to discuss this development. Good to have you join us, Dr. Adediro. Now, many Lebanese have now taken to the streets protesting what they think is negligence on the part of government officials. Now, why do you think that we've not seen anyone brought to some sort of account on this as a result of this explosion?
Thank you for having me. I think that because this is a recent situation and it is developing. Earlier today, there were indications, the Prime Minister mentioned briefly that there could be a possibility of an attack, even though that was disputed at the beginning of the week. So I think that this is an early investigation and it's unraveling. So over the next few days and weeks, we would hear more about what exactly transpired at the beginning of the week and what caused this unfortunate situation. But it's also very important to mention that the government has clearly said that those who contributed to these unfortunate incidents would be brought to book. So there is a sense in which there is a desire for justice, but I think that would slowly come as investigations unravel.
This government has only been in office since February, which is about 6 months. But we've seen about 25% unemployment rate in Lebanon, huge debts and economic depression. So does it look like this government has a grip on the situation there?
As you've rightly mentioned, and as your report also mentioned, Lebanon is going through the worst economic crisis in decades. It's the third most indebted nation in the world, and there are shortages. There are food shortages that Lebanon is currently experiencing. In fact, what has made this particularly also worse, the Beirut bomb. The Beirut blast, what has made it particularly worse is that the country's main grain silo was affected. In fact, it was completely destroyed earlier in the week when the blast happened. So this is an unfolding tragedy. This is a terrible tragedy that has come at a terrible time for the country. Over the last few weeks, in fact, the last few months, we've been seeing protests in Lebanon. Earlier in April, someone was shot in one of the days of protest in Beirut. So it's a terrible situation that the country is currently experiencing, and that has not also particularly been helped by the COVID pandemic, which is in fact affected most countries and thrown most countries into deep economic turmoils.
We see protesters asking for the government to resign. Some are also asking for reforms. The president of France, Emmanuel Macron, was in that country yesterday, and he promised reforms. We know that the international community will be sending some level of aid and economic packages to Lebanon. Should these economic packages be tied to these reforms?
I have always had a very different position on the kind of interference politics that many of the world powers engage in. I believe that there is a need to help Lebanon at the moment and this time of crisis, but I don't think conditionalities should be attached. I believe that even though France feels that it has a role to play as a former colonial power, but these sort of attaching conditionalities to the way that they're provided, I think it smacks of imperialism. It smacks of the kind of politics, imperial politics, neo-colonial politics that many decent people would absolutely reject. And so for me, I think that the rest of the world should contribute. The US, for example, has made mention of the fact that it's willing to contribute about $17 million in aid to Lebanon. But if you're going to help the Lebanese people at this moment, it is not in your place, I believe, to be making those kind of demanding those kind of concessions. And I think that it's unfortunate that many of these world powers go through their foreign policy and attach their foreign aid to conditionalities. Having said that, I think that there is also definitely a clear need for reforms in Lebanon. Clearly, because obviously of the economic downturn that the country is experiencing. But this should come from the Lebanese people. These kind of clamor for reforms should be locally engineered. It should be locally demanded, not foreign
If
imposed.
I may jump in, Dr. Adediro, you have said the reforms should come from the Lebanese people. But do you see this as a tipping point or a turning point for Lebanon?
I think it is. I think that even though there has been protests from the beginning of the year, but these have been low-level protests. I think the anger in Beirut now is very palpable. We can see that the people are absolutely disappointed with the sort of negligence they've seen, and how the government has allowed this kind of tragedy to unfold. And I think that the kind of clamor that we're seeing now is reminiscent of many of the kind of chanting we saw at the beginning of the Arab Spring. So basically people saying that we want the regime down, we want these. Even though Lebanon is slightly different from the kind of political, has a different political structure to the ones that we saw in Egypt and in Tunisia, where those were effective authoritarian regimes. Lebanon is a notional democracy of some sort, and there is some sort of power sharing between the major religious groups in Lebanon, so between the Muslims and the Christians. But I think that definitely that these can precipitate some form of changes at the very least, and I'm hoping that those kind of changes will come, but it would come from the Lebanese people.
International relations expert Dr. Bola Adediran, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you very much.